我们从今天早上谈到了个人的社会责任、个人的碳综合，到城市，甚至于是整个国家的碳综合，大家呢都在寻找更完整的资讯，但是资讯的齐备总是会有终止的时候。更重要的是呢，就如同刚才在台北大学的李建明老师所说的，透过资讯我们可以建立新的价值，产生新的规范，最重要的就是行为改变。今天下午呢，我们的第一个议程呢是关于专题演讲。今年的专题演讲总共有4位讲者，我们来到了第4位，也就是最后一位。这位讲者他不仅是研究上面的先驱者，更是行动上的积极者。透过唐奖的肯定，让我们看到了他对现代科学研究还有永续发展的重要贡献。接续下来，就让我们来欢迎慈济论坛专题演讲4的引言人，唐奖教育基金会陈正川执行长来做引言，大家掌声鼓励。感谢陈执行长。陈执行长呢，同时也是台大土木系的名誉教授，前行政院莫拉克灾后重建推动委员会的执行长，请执行长。
好，各位先进，大家下午好。我们非常感谢慈济特别在这个论坛的时候邀请唐奖永续发展奖的得主Ramanathan 教授来发表这个非常有趣而且是重要的问题。那他要谈的不是只有科学跟政策，还有宗教所以他认为这个要结盟起来来推动这个工作那我就跟各位介绍一下Ramanathan 教授。那印度裔美籍的 Ramanathan 教授是美国 Scripps 海洋研究所加州大学圣地牙哥分校气候永续的校长讲座教授这是学校里面最高的讲座。那他是美国科学院、瑞典科学院、欧洲科学院还有梵蒂冈宗座科学院的院士那他长期投入气候变迁和全球暖化的研究倡议，为他赢得无数的荣誉，包括2013年联合国环境规划署 UNCP 颁给他的地球的斗士奖。那2018年他跟 Jim Hansen 2位共同获得唐奖永续发展奖，来表彰他在增进气候变迁的基础认知与空气污染对气候系统冲击所做的开创性的贡献，并采取直接行动倡议，以促进有效的减缓政策的制定。因为他提出来他的研究出来不是只有二氧化碳，其他的气体包括空气污染等等这些都会对于这个地球暖化有影响我们来看一下他的介绍的影片。
Most of us know there is only one Earth, but few actually understand how it has suffered. Dr. James Hansen is considered a pioneer in climate change science. He is among the very first to develop a 3D climate model and compile temperature records around the globe. In 1981, he clearly demonstrated the connection between human-caused carbon dioxide and a rise in global temperatures, earning him an invitation to testify before a Senate committee in 1988. He asserted with great certainty that the greenhouse effect has begun, dramatically increasing public awareness of global warming. Dr. Veerabhadran Ramanathan is considered a visionary in climate change research. He was the first to discover that CFCs, widely used as refrigerants, are non-CO2 super greenhouse gases. His groundbreaking discoveries led to international efforts to implement regulatory changes. In the 1990s, Dr. Ramanathan led a large-scale field experiment discovering atmospheric brown clouds, which have a global dimming effect and health consequences. 30 years have gone by, and all of Dr. Hansen's predictions have come true. He feels he needs to make it more clear to the public. No one is more supportive than Mrs. Hansen.
He made up his mind to make the story as clear as can be, and no one was going to stop him.
Now he's helping a group of young children fight for their future through legal means. Growing up in an impoverished village in India, Dr. Ramanathan has always been troubled by the injustice of climate change. Sharing the same roots, Mrs. Ramanathan could not agree more.
The top 1 billion is responsible, but it's the bottom 3 billion that actually suffer the consequences of climate change. That's where Pope Francis got into the game.
Now he continues working on Project Surya, an initiative he founded whose mission is to help the poor use clean energy. For these two proud grandfathers, global warming is not just a scientific issue, it is also a moral issue. They both hope to leave future generations a sustainable planet, the place we call Earth.
Ramanathan 作为一个顶尖的科学家，他关心年轻人的未来。他负责在美国加州大学系统的10所国立大学开授曲线弯转，他希望把升温的曲线把它弯下来，让气候变迁解决之道的联合课程，那也包括跟台湾成功大学还有世界上多所顶尖的学校在做合作，希望经由教育使年轻人共同致力扭转危机。它也是最新的一本书《人的健康、地球的健康与我们的责任》。这本是一个开放启用的书的共同编辑。这是第一本书以广泛的科学跟非科学的学科及观点，去讨论气候变迁对公共卫生的影响。它也推动经由宗教力量的努力。他利用机会向天主教教宗方济各亲面说明气候变迁问题，并回应教宗：“我能做些什么呢？”他说：“圣父，你已成为世界的道德领袖，所以你应该让你的子民成为地球的好主人。”2周以后，教宗向全世界天主教徒对气候变迁发表声明：如果人类滥用大自然，大自然就会反扑。教宗系发表气候变迁第一个通译，说明我们的共同家园，人类负有道德责任。他深深知道，要经由宗教的重大力量，使一般民众能够了解气候变迁问题的重要性。Ramanathan 持续在美国基督教各教会及组织进行宣传及推广教育。慈济基金会30年来与佛教慈善团体积极结合全民力量，推动环保，促进永续发展。今天，慈济举办未来地球与绿色行动的论坛，特别邀请 Ramanathan 来互动交流，相信这是群集宗教力量，使人类及地球更能够永续很好的一个互动。让我们一起欢迎并恭听 Ramanathan 教授的演讲。
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted and honored to join these discussions we're having about the environmental crises and sustainability of the planet. I want to thank the Tang Foundation for making my participation possible. I also want to thank the Tzu Chi Forum and congratulate them on organizing such a summit. This sort of exchange between scientists, policymakers, and those on the front line of fighting climate change, like Tzu Chi Forum, that's the sort of debate and discussion we should be having to fight this crisis. So let me start off with what I'm going to talk to you about. The first thing is, I'm going to talk to you about existential threat from climate change. And I'm going to conclude with solutions. And one of my solutions is that we need to form an alliance between science, religion, and policy for the purpose of persuading the general public to take the sort of drastic actions we need to take. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a climate scientist, and I have observed climate change for the last 40 plus years with instruments on satellites, on aircraft, ships, surface stations, and more recently with drones. And I've documented the change, and I've done my best to interpret the changes. So I'm in California, and the fire is the major problem we are facing with climate change. In fact, at this very moment I'm recording this talk on October 28th, there is a raging fire 100 kilometers north of us. And this is the sort of sunset we see after a major fire. Basically, the smoke was taken out, the blue and the green of the sunlight, and leaving behind a red hot, fiery sun. 2 years ago, I organized a meeting at the Vatican, and Professor Yuan Li was there in that meeting. And what he concluded, this meeting of experts, is that climate change caused by burning of fossil fuels and other human activities poses an existential threat to Homo sapiens and contributes to mass extinction of species. So that's what I want to address, this existential threat. In fact, a book which resulted from that meeting was just published about 4 months ago. It's available at Springer, and it's open source. So why did we conclude that climate change become an existential threat? If we assume that climate change is not going to be mitigated and the emissions are going to continue as they are today, our forecast for the latter part of this century, beyond 2060, 2070, that climate change has a 50% probability of warming to 4 to 5 degrees. And there is a 5 to 10% probability the warming could even exceed beyond 6, 8 degrees. And this 5 to 10% probability is because of many potential tipping points. And if indeed we are unlucky that we meet with this 5 to 10% probability later part of this century, we have concluded that would indeed would pose existential threat. And that's what I want to talk to you about. So this is another probability distribution from one of our papers we published 11 years ago. And what we sort of estimated is that as the planet warms from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 degrees, various natural tipping points we would face. First is the rapid melting of the Arctic sea ice, the melting of the Himalayan Tibetan glaciers. Already 25% of those glaciers are melting. The massive melting of the Greenland ice sheet, and by the time you cross 3 degrees, the Amazon rainforest would dry out, and impacting the thermohaline circulation, and complete melting of the West Antarctic ice sheet. So these are the potential tipping points. And there is one thing I want to point out. There is now a convincing link between the global warming and extreme weather. That link, interestingly, is provided by one single equation. That is that equation which shows the evaporation of water from the oceans and from land, would increase exponentially with temperature. And that is the reason California is drying out, because water is evaporating from our plants, from our trees, from our soil, all the time, every second, every minute, every hour, every day, throughout the year. And that's why when we get fires, they spontaneously combust millions of square kilometers. Within few hours, the fire spreads. And the same thing happens with hurricanes. And I'm showing you why Southeast Asia, including Taiwan, is so exposed to hurricanes, because just your neighborhood, south of you, is this huge Western Pacific warm pool of water, over 28 degrees Celsius. And when you heat up the planet, there is enormous latent energy from the ocean which has vented into the atmosphere, and that latent energy fuels the storms. So it is this single equation which has the planet under a death grip, linking climate change to extreme weather. Now I want to turn my attention to social tipping points. I think of the world as two separate worlds. They are interlinked. The first is the top 1 billion people. All of us here are in that category. We live with seemingly unlimited access to fossil fuels. Compare that with the bottom 3 billion who are living in villages mostly in many nations, particularly South Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, South America. This 3 billion lack access to fossil fuels even for meeting basic needs. So imagine the amount of suffering, displacement, and mass migration amongst these 3 billion if you heat up the planet to 3, 4, 5 degrees. And I'm showing you here this data, basically gigatons of carbon emitted by various groups. The bottom 3.1 billion people, their emission is just about 1.9 gigatons. The top 1 billion people are emitting as much as 15 billion tons a year. So we have a huge moral, ethical responsibility for the suffering we are inflicting on the poorest 3 billion. The other social tipping point I want to talk about is, out of 10 models, one of them, this is a Princeton University model, joint study between NASA and Princeton. What they're showing, beyond the 2050 time period, this is the kind of mega drought the world would be experiencing. The entire Southwest America, the Amazon, the entire Mediterranean, and vast areas of Northeast, South and Northeast, Eastern Asia, right? So basically, our food-producing region will shrink when our population is expanding from 7.5 to 10 billion people. So imagine the catastrophe we are going to face if we let this happen, okay? The kind of social tipping points is there could be hundreds of millions of mass migration. How are we going to accommodate all of them? So if you're not persuaded with this 5 to 10% probability argument, I want to put it in more graphic terms. So what do we mean by 5 to 10% probability of existential threat? If I told you there is a 5 to 10% probability of that plane crashing, none of you will get on that plane. But we are sending our children and grandchildren on that plane just by our unsustainable consumption of energy. So what's the future here? We have projected, there's a paper published 2 years ago, that the planet will reach 1.5 degree warming in 10 years. That's 2030. As of 2015, we have already warmed the planet by 1 degree. So we are saying another 15 years, the warming is going to be amplified by 50%. What does that mean? Just like COVID-19, climate change will move into all of our living rooms within 10 years. So now let me move to solutions. Since we know emission anywhere will cause global warming everywhere, this is going to require global cooperation. We are not going to solve this problem by pointing fingers at each other. We've got to work together. And this is a new report released last week on disasters by the UN agency. Now, what they've compared is two 20-decade periods. The one during the first part of 21st century, and the other one, the last 20 years. And these are all weather-related disasters. They nearly doubled. And then focusing on the economic losses, we went from $1.6 trillion to $3 trillion of economic losses. So this is hurting us in many, many, many ways. And when we go to, say, 2-degree warming by 2040, this is the sort of projections public health experts are making. 1.5 billion would be facing deadly heat, and there'll be mass displacement, migration, etc. So now, I've talked about the problem. Let me talk about what can we do about solving the issue. First, it's not too late. There are plenty of scalable solutions are available, and we have a decade to implement these solutions. Why decade? I already told you in 10 years, the warming is going to go past 1.5. So if you have any chance of limiting it at 1.5 or around that, we got to start it now. In terms of solutions, I teamed up with the 50 faculty from all 10 campuses of University of California and published a report of bending the curve with 10 solutions. This was released in 2014. Our governor took it to the Paris Summit. And I'm not going to go over this. This is sort of puts the solutions under 6 pillars. If you see, our top pillar is societal transformation. What this team of 50, which is included natural scientists, social scientists, engineers, nuclear scientists, is that we are not solving this problem not because we lack technological solutions. We have abundant technological solutions. We need societal transformation. That was the call by this group. And I'm going to talk to you what I'm personally doing on the societal transformation. I'm teaming up with my 2 daughters who formed this NGO, Next Leaf Analytics, and we are providing clean cooking to villages in South Asia and Africa, basically cutting down the pollution from cooking and cutting down the need to cut forests as fuel. The next, I've teamed up with many colleagues and started this program, Climate Education for All. And our theory of change is that climate disruption and crises requires fundamental societal transformation. Education must be one of the pillars to enable such a transformation. And the education must start from kindergarten, from the time the child is 4 or 5 years old, and it has to continue through adulthood, how to live sustainably with the planet. And I wanted to point out this kindergarten 12 education from this famous Chinese philosopher Confucius. He said it beautifully. If your plan is for 1 year, plant rice. If your plan is for 10 years, plant trees. If your plan is for 100 years, educate children. So that's what we have started. So I've led a team again of California faculty, and we started a new education protocol for undergraduate students, okay? We have a digital textbook, Bending the Curve, that's shown on the left-hand side. It's open source. Anyone can download it. It has science. It has but mainly devoted to solutions. We have created a hybrid course. It's being taught in all 10 campuses. In fact, this course is also being piloted at National Taiwan University by my former colleague of mine at the University of California. He's now a professor at National Taiwan University, Professor Chern. And then we have created a MOOC. It's open again source, and then we have an online version where you can sit in one campus that teach many, many campuses. And we're also starting a new program on environmental, climate, and literacy project for kindergarten to 12. University of California, we teamed up with the California State University, which has 25 campuses, and we held a summit, and there is a new educational program being created for all children in California. Now I want to talk to you about my last theme of my talk, that we need to team up with faith groups and religious institutions. So why do we need religions to fight climate change? I just want to quote what we wrote in Science. Finding ways to develop a sustainable relationship with our planet requires ultimately also a moral revolution. Religious institutions can and should take the lead on bringing about such a new attitude towards creation. And I briefed Pope Francis as part of our Pontifical Academy of Science meeting. I talked to him about the social injustice of 1 billion causing the climate pollution and 3 billion suffering from it. And in his encyclical, which he released a year later after this meeting, he had a beautiful phrase. He says, "Cry of the earth should be heard with the cry of the poor." And I have a series of questions. Can science and religion find a common language? Can science and religion work together? How do we deal with the pace of technological change? What's happening to our human nature? What are we doing to nature, creation, etc., etc.? So what is it we can accomplish? What I'm hoping for, it's the faith institutions who speak directly to the public. Okay? Climate change has become so politicized. We need a non-political forum. And I think our faith leaders and those who preach could be an important transformational impact on the general public, to talk to them about the imminence of the problem, the urgency of the problem, and the serious nature of the problem. So let me conclude with this. Just a picture of what's going on. Our planet was in an ice age about 20,000 years ago. It was colder by about 4 degrees. We got out of that ice age about 11,500 years ago, and then went into this warm, stable Holocene climate. And that's when most of civilization developed. We allowed our agricultural revolution, followed by industrial revolution. Now we are transitioning into the so-called Anthropocene, and we are taking that climate somewhere. I don't know where we are taking. I don't know where we are going to stop. But the time to fight that is now. Thank you so much for inviting me to this. I'm looking forward to the debate and the discussions. This sort of gives you the link of various things I talked about. Again, thank you so much.
非常感恩 Dr. Ramanathan， 非常的感恩，非常激励人心的演讲。作为一位科学家，他让我们看到了地球的发展，也更发出了他的警语。陈教授，
我想这个演讲啊，应该是这个论坛里面的相当经典精彩的一场演讲哈。那 Ramanathan 他也非常期望啊，在疫情 后啊，能够再到台湾来啊，他当然也非常希望来跟慈济啊做更多的互动，相互合作哈。就跟他所谈的气候变迁很多都被政治化了，需要透过非政治的，在道德方面的这方面的沟通跟加强才有办法共同来解决这个气候变迁的问题。我们非常感谢 Ramanathan 的演讲，也谢谢大家。
谢谢陈教授，感谢陈教授的引言还有结语。